who is the buy in the Packers offense. That and more this week on the couch. John Daigle, the Packers, no Davante Adams. So who do we want on our fantasy team to take advantage of that?
Tanyan's return from injury is going to be interesting. I think everyone is going to hype naturally Aaron Jones receiving splits without Davante Adams. He's played 8 career games without Davante Adams. But honestly, if Robert Tonyan, who had a drastically down year last year, if he's the one who comes back healthy, and we've seen natural recovery from ACLs get better as we've gone along throughout the years of football via nutrition, via recovery, via everything. I think he's the one where you should be buying low on, because we only have 2 starts the last 2 seasons, right? Especially in 2020, where Tonyan finished the game without Adams. But in those 2 games, he produced 5 catches for 50 yards and a touchdown, and 6 catches for 98 yards and 3 touchdowns. And so if that big-bodied red zone threat, which he essentially wasn't last year, returns this year, I think that's the one we're actually buying low on, even though the obvious answer is going to be move Aaron Jones up those rankings.
Yeah, well, or get in. I mean, get in somewhere. I'm not going to talk people out of A.J. Dillon. I'm not going to talk people out of Allen Lazard. His ADP is going to be modest. It could be one of the situations where week to week, a different players in the spotlight, but the offense is going to be fine. Aaron Rodgers is going to be fine. The numbers say Aaron Rodgers is going to be fine. The team has gone 7-0 over the last 3 years. When Rodgers is out, they won at Dallas. They won, I think, at Kansas City. They're a fine team without Davante Adams. What did you think of the Raiders side of this? Now, I mean, if you want to like to delve more in the sports talk radio angle, John, just when you saw the Raiders make this move, I think a lot of people panned it. I think a lot of people thought it was foolish. What did you think?
I don't think it was the correct move long term, but I respect the hell out of it, because you had to compete with the gauntlet. Not only that's the AFC, because you do have the worst quarterback in your own division. No matter what we think about Derek Carr, he is a terrific player who doesn't turn the ball over, but the explosiveness, like the face of the franchise, like when you look around with Russell Wilson, Patrick Mahomes, and Justin Herbert in no particular order, that's terrifying. And so to get him with arguably the best receiver in the league, someone he has natural rapport and chemistry with and is friends with from their time at Fresno together, and then just to add another layer in Chandler Jones on the other side of the ball as well. Like, they didn't stand back and say, we are accepting last place. Are they the worst team in the AFC West? Maybe, but at least they're trying to compete. And so although these moves long-term don't make much sense, Bill Barnwell has a terrific breakdown of it actually over on ESPN.com. But in the short term, trying to compete with the juggernauts, yes, I actually love the move.
Yeah. Don't we want that? Don't we want teams spurring each other on, especially with the nature of the salary cap? I get annoyed when people say the salary cap's not real. The salary cap's very real. It's very real. There are teams, Dallas, others, that are experiencing the pain of it. And it does have this mortgaging sense. You can think of it like a board game, like that we played as kids, right? Where you can continue to push off the price of your current actions into the future, expecting growth in the future. But if you ever overshoot that, then you have to go through some pain. And I think that we want teams pushing that to the limit. And we're seeing that in the AFC West. It's crazy. Probably at least one of these teams. You see, Indy got Matt Ryan. Tennessee got better this week. Cincinnati got better this week. You can just go through Indy, Tennessee, Baltimore, Cleveland now with Deshaun Watson, Cincinnati, and the 4 AFC West teams. 3 teams out of that group aren't going to make the playoffs. And at least one's going to be a team that we wouldn't expect, a team that we don't have in the playoffs. Go ahead.
As with everything in the NFL, with life, actually.
Sure.
We know it's not black and white. We know it's in the gray area. And so on one hand, you are correct. Of course, the salary cap matters. Of course it does. On the other hand, though, I do fall back to, I live by Bill Parcells. I still think he's one of the most intelligent human beings we ever had in football. And he taught men life lessons along the way. And one of the quotes he always had was about the salary cap. But teams don't cut players they don't want to cut. Right. It's literally that simple. And so, on one hand, Davante Adams giving him that much money, of course, long term, as we talked about, maybe a detriment to the team overall building, but also good deal for the Packers in that they weren't going to give him that money. Like
No.
that's sort of the amount he asked for 2 seasons ago. And it's funny how that route, like, it actually makes perfect sense. It wasn't like an unhappiness with either side. It was literally Davante Adams 2 seasons ago, or last offseason, I should say, requesting 21 plus million annually. And the Packers said, that's not the market, which, by the way, they are correct. That was not the market. Still actually isn't the market, but not the market. You can't have that. Okay, season ends. Davante Adams puts that last dance photograph from Michael Jordan on Instagram, signaling I'm done here. Like, this is it. I don't know why you're trying to believe anything else. This is literally the end of my time. Aaron Rodgers then steps away for a few weeks and, of course, has to, and maybe this is the narrative, but I think this is what makes it make sense, and that he has to then think about, do I want to continue playing football at my age without my friend, without one of the best receivers in the league? He comes back. He obviously understands Adams is gone no matter what and says, okay, you know what? And it only took like 3 or 4 weeks. It wasn't even a long time. Yeah, I'm back in. I'm committed to this franchise for at least another year. Plus, this money resetting the quarterback market also helps at my age. So I will gladly take it. And then Adams still done, gets traded. Packers getting a first and a second rounder for him. We'll see what happens with those draft picks. But overall, I do in the short term especially think it's a win-win. And
exactly.
By the way, like how crazy is it to think, people probably forget that 2 years ago, Aaron Rodgers, we're 2 seasons removed from him. I don't want to say declining, but not being this force, right? Like the last 2 seasons, 85 touchdowns and 9 picks. Absolute insanity. 8 yards per attempt the last 2 seasons overall. But that's not who he was 2 seasons removed from. Like, we were worried about his overall career. And then he came back with vengeance, literally. And like you said, now the Packers are going to be just fine from the way he's playing.
Yeah, he's still very good. And because in some ways, the win here, I mean, the win for the Packers, and I'm not sure what the actual story is. It sounds like this is a Davante Adams driven thing, that he bought the house at the beginning, like March 6th, I think came out that he bought the house in Vegas, $12 million house. And I don't know whether the Packers would have given him that contract or not, how far they would have gone, because it seems like Adams just had his mind made up that that's what he wanted. But because of that, they're able to keep Devondre Campbell. They're able to keep Rasul Douglas. These are great reclamation projects that were very important players for that team and their success last year. You mentioned Big Bob Tunyon, not that they weren't going to keep him, but I mean, it just makes it easier to get all these things, make all these things happen for this defense, lock down Jair Alexander. And we'll see if they can get over the hump and get past themselves. But the Raiders, when Cecil and I talk, we always say, when the Raiders are good, it's good for the NFL. It's a shame that it's been so infrequent. But, they were a play or two from taking the Bengals to overtime or beating them. And we all saw what happened after that. This was a team that was just coming out of the fallout of John Gruden and Rich Bisaccia, and they pulled it together. And now you look at what they have, really just the offensive line. If their offensive line is adequate, then this team can make some noise, especially and go ahead.
Which is so funny too, because remember, last offseason, they revamped it, even though it was an elite unit. Like, they decided to rebuild it between Rodney Hudson and everyone else, even though it didn't need, like, that was the one part we were sure about on their offense that could carry them into the postseason. And now they're trying to rectify that. They just re-signed their right tackle, because Alex Leatherwood, last year's first-round pick, like, they started him, I believe it was 5 games at right tackle, and he wasn't cutting it. And that was pretty much the analysis from every draft nick outside of Mayock, was like, this guy doesn't belong in the first round, and he's probably going to struggle at tackle. And they kicked him into right guard, and then recently just re-signed their more of a quality depth signing, who they were starting at right tackle, because they can't play Leatherwood there. And so it is funny how just they actually had the team in place. They had that unit in place, and then John Gruden tore it apart completely.
Yeah, well, Gruden was the story of Gruden playing out. It's funny because the story of Urban Meyer, we got a great postscript on the Urban Meyer short-lived era this week. And it really just confirms, I love Matt Waldman, but I love the way he said, this is the kind of decision that's made in a sauna or on a private plane. How do we get to someone like Urban Meyer genuinely being as worse. I don't want to say as bad as anybody was saying, worse than anybody was saying. There was nobody out there going as far as what reality actually was, which is just a larger lesson about our perceptions and what's true. But the John Gruden thing also felt that way, right? 10 years, 100 million, Mark Davis. And then it played out in this manic way. Although there's also, like, if you like the JFK conspiracy theory angle, there's also this angle of like, how is it that Gruden got hit by a shrapnel from an investigation that wasn't even about him? You put on your tinfoil cap and things like that. But emotionally, and then you have the Henry Ruggs thing too. So we talked about this during the season last year. Emotionally, it's like a family. I mean, a locker room was like a family, and there's like trauma going on. And it's going to be interesting to see with Josh McDaniels, who has his own backstory, trying to repeat the Bill Belichick story of give me another chance after how badly everything went in Denver. And go ahead.
I'm excited to see what McDaniels does. You would like to think, as just a human being, he has grown from taking over the Broncos as a coach and GM. And again, very young individual.
Right.
You would like to think that ego is now gone. He learned from his lessons. Also, why I'd like to see Raheem Morris get another coaching job.
Mm-hmm.
And so many individuals like that who excel at their craft, but honestly got the opportunity way too early in their career. I think, I'm just interested to see what happens. Also, what makes it fun is that I forgot where I was going. You can keep talking.
That's
I'll speak
okay.
of it again.
Well, look, let's do some topics, some timely topics, because it is we're just like floating, tubing down the stream here of consciousness about all this football stuff that's been happening. But there are specific things. The play tectonics are still in motion. Early this week, again, another player-driven thing. I think, John, Matt Ryan going to Indy. And this one also, talk about trauma, is in the wake of Deshaun Watson. What a story we've had to play out on that public stage. Not just that Deshaun Watson has a new team, but you have these hurt feelings everywhere, right? Mm-hmm. Like it was a damaging, the whole thing left damage everywhere. The New Orleans probably was the most rational about it. They're just moved on. Jameis, and Jameis is happy to be in New Orleans. New Orleans is happy with Jameis, and there's no hurt feelings there, but there were hurt feelings otherwise. And Matt Ryan, I think, is probably one of those. Is Indy credible? I mean, the stacked AFC, right? They have to get past Tennessee. They were a playoff team with Phillip Rivers. Is Matt Ryan at this point in his career better, at least with this offense, with Frank Reich, than Phillip Rivers was? How did you feel about Indy's prospects when you saw that go down?
I loved it. I think it's the move Indy should have made last year. They don't need like an exemplary playmaker. They literally need someone to take care of the ball. And that's what they wanted from Carson Wentz. You manage this game and we are going to be just fine. Ryan, in his 14-year career, is playing with the best offensive line of his entire career now. It's incredible. So all they're asking him to do is please don't turn the ball over. Wentz, for example, in his career, every season, he's had at least 8 fumbles. A lot of those were flashed on national TV for lowlights whenever he'd have those inside the 5-yard line. Ryan is not culpable of that. He's not one to typically do that. And you can look at his numbers like the last 3 or 4 seasons, say he's been declining. I would argue he's had a offensive line that's been bottom 4 in pressure rate each of those seasons. Also to be without Calvin Ridley the past couple of years for a lot of the time, without Julio Jones a lot of the time. Kyle Pitts learning to play both tight end and wide receiver. Because remember, Pitts opened the year, even though he ended with an amazing season, over 1,000 yards, he opened the year as a tight end and struggled immensely. Only when they started putting him on the slot did he respond like the fantasy star we thought he would. And then it was even a roller coaster because then teams started just throwing their best corner on him and he'd get shut out. And then eventually he learned how to play against the team's best defender as well. But overall, Ryan has had to deal with all of this. And a lot of times just look up and see, for better or worse, Olamide Zaccheaus or Russell Gage, who, by the way, like Russell Gage now, we talk about him as outstanding he was, and he did develop and grow into his own role. But remember, last year's Russell Gage was not the Russell Gage we saw like the last 3 seasons. I would argue like the first half of last year was not the same Russell Gage as the second half, being pelted with volume and having to learn how to break tackles and make plays beyond just that opportunity, because he's had that opportunity without Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones in the past, and he didn't do anything at all. That's why it was really good to see him actually answer. Also funny now because Brady, obviously the Russell Gage fantasy hype, and he should be hyped, but it's getting hyped even more because of the tweet in the report that Brady texted him 24 hours after he returned from retirement and said, "You're on the market. Like, I saw what you did. We need you." But also, like, Tom Brady's not an NFL scout. Tom Brady, in the last time they played the Falcons, looked across the field and saw Russell Gage get 11 catches for 130 yards against the Bucs and thought, "Wow, this guy's the best receiver in the entire league." So a little bit of a touch and go there. Take it with a grain of salt, but overall, it is a great spot for Matt Ryan, for Russell Gage. And the Colts are absolutely contenders and probably the best team, even though we are talking about the same division, as the faux number 1 seed Titans.
Yeah. Whoa. Yeah. Hey, I mean, I'll just really briefly, because there's a lot to sift through there. I did like the Titans trading a 6th-round pick for Robert Woods. They're perfect fit, and getting Austin Hooper for $6 million.
Arguably the best run blocking wide receiver in the league.
Right.
Like, that's what actually matters for that trade.
Yeah.
Just to get pieces back. That's why I was also so happy Mike Vrabel won Coach of the Year, just to do the most with the least. I don't care about their burnout in the playoffs. It was absolutely amazing what he did coaching that team to the number 1 seed. Also, to your point, going back, why I was happy to see Rich Bisaccia get the number 2 nod in Coach of the Year, because to overcome all of that between the injuries, between Henry Ruggs' absence, between like this offensive line being torn apart, and then to carry them to the playoffs, create what was a top 3 pass rush along the way in terms of pressure rate created over the last 8 games of the season. I think he did absolutely deserve it over Zach Taylor, since, for better or worse, Zach Taylor kind of had a bad team, fell into Joe Burrow, and now he was being named Coach of the Year.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and there was hurt feelings, I think, with that staff, the Bisaccia staff, that they didn't get a chance. They really thought.
I thought he really, and a lot of interns get their interview, and then the organization kicks him out. Like, yeah, we gave you your interview, now you're done. I genuinely thought Rich Bisaccia should have been brought back.
Yeah, but the Green Bay did great to hire him, though. That was the most important. That's more important than losing Davante Adams. But going back to what you were saying about Gage, and it's funny, maybe what you mentioned about Brady, maybe there's some truth to that he picked that up from Belichick, because Belichick loved signing players that played well against the Patriots. If it was a player that gave him trouble, then that's a player that he wanted to add. And you saw that. And I want to mention, just as a quick aside, Tom Dimitroff, Falcons are in cap hell, right? There's one angle to this Matt Ryan trade that left a lot of people just quizzical about it, John, because you're paying $40 million in dead cap for a player that's not playing for you. Like, you're paying money on your payroll for a player that's not going to help you win games, and the point is to win games. I mean, I know. Go ahead.
No, I'm just agreeing with you. Yes.
Yeah, and at the same time, I think Terry Fontenot, Arthur Smith have an idea of, like, let's turn the page. We know this is not the future of this team, or at least that's what they have to tell themselves, because Matt Ryan came to them and said, "I want to be traded," after the Deshaun Watson dalliance. Who knows? That's
why the Falcons are going to be fun and interesting to watch, because we know they're not going to compete.
Well, Mariota, I'm handing Mariota off to you, and I want you to run.
Well, not only Marcus Mariota, and again, career 3.8 scrambles per game under Arthur Smith whenever he was starting for the Titans, Mariota, but also it's now the same coaching staff, the same organization that took a chess pick like Cordero Patterson, who had been pigeonholed throughout the rest of his career, and said, I think this guy can do more. Now, Patterson wasn't treated like that over the last 6 games, I believe it was, when he returned from injury. They took him out of the passing game and started using him like an early down grinder, which he didn't excel at, because that never made sense in Chicago. That didn't make sense in his last stretch for Atlanta. It's still confusing why they actually took his passing game role away. But nonetheless, they saw what he could do. I would imagine that same coaching staff can see what Marcus Mariota can do and say, this guy is clearly not a pocket quarterback. Let's get interesting here, especially for a rebuilding organization that has to stretch every inch of the field to compete on offense. And just knowing that AJ Terrell couldn't change an entire defense despite his stellar island play. Like, he literally shut down an entire side of the defensive field, and it didn't matter at all. The rest of the players were still performed so poorly. We know Mariota's going to have the ball in his hands quite a bit. And so that's what makes it super interesting for fantasy, because we also know he's going to scramble a lot.
As soon as it came out, Jay Glazer and a bunch of other people, it all popped on Twitter at once that the Matt Ryan trade is going to happen. Immediately, I thought about Arthur Smith and Marcus Mariota, because even though everyone just remembers Ryan Tannehill and Mariota getting benched, actually, Arthur Smith, one of the things they cited when they promoted him to offensive coordinator was his relationship with Marcus Mariota. And that's, I think, a relationship that transcends how that quarterback battle worked out. And when you see how Tannehill played and how the team is done, it's not like it's something where Mariota had to hang his head and leave in shame. And it's a beautiful story, potentially, John, because, I mean, Arthur Smith needs Marcus Mariota. I mean, he needs someone to make the team credible. Like, just do what Houston or Detroit did last year. Like, just be credible. Like, just not lose the fan base. Okay, it's a fickle fan base as it is. It's Atlanta. Just don't lose the fan base. Keep the team competitive. And the last time we saw Mariota, it's like a Sunday night or Monday night game, right? He looked good. He looked like an NFL quarterback. He looked better than he looked like Mitchell Trubisky for those few games in his rookie year when everything worked for the Bears offense. I mean, it's there. There's those glimmers. And Marcus Mariota needs Arthur Smith because he needs to rehabilitate his value. Go ahead.
That's why the target tree in Atlanta is interesting, because where else do they go? We assume, I guess, they're going to draft someone else, but right now, it basically is Kyle Pitts. Like, that's where all the targets trickle down to, and to a lesser extent, Cordarrelle Patterson. It's a very condensed offense, which is also why it's fun, because those guys are easy to peck off, especially when there's so many targets available, missing from last year's production. These targets have to go somewhere, and so we know the players, Patterson and Pitts, to target right now, barring like a substantial splash in the draft.
Yeah, it's and like you said, there's still moves to be made, but we'll see about Olamide Zaccheaus, who's the number one guy right now. You brought up Gage, and this is the kind of stuff I geek out on right now. You know what I'm geeking out on right now? Comp picks. I love Nick Korte, Korte. He's like an absolute must follow all year, but especially during free agency, because he has a constantly updated projection of the comp picks for the following year, like based on the moves that are happening right now. It's so fascinating to me to see how they get canceled out. In some ways, some of these free agent signings are as if they're trading a 4th round pick or a 5th round pick or even a 3rd round pick for the player, which would totally change your perception of the signing if you understood that. So I'm geeking out on that. And when I'm looking at the Falcons right now, they're in line. And I think that Terry Fontenot is obviously playing the long game here. They're in line. This is what I would call a parting gift from Tom Dimitroff, John. Russell Gage, a 6th round pick in 2018. He was a gunner, basically. They didn't even know if he was going to be a defensive back or a wide receiver. The athleticism was obviously there. He's coming from LSU. Oluokun from Yale and an undersized athletic linebacker. They were both 6th round picks. And Atlanta is now in line to get a comp 4th and a comp 5th. I think I have to check that. It might not be true. No, go ahead.
No, I'll update you on this. I was actually going to talk about this with you, because they were in line to get that 4th and 5th. You are correct.
Right.
But what happened, and maybe you were going along this path in that signing Mariota, and they actually just signed Lorenzo Carter on Monday as well. They then lost these comp picks. They lost their 4th and 5th in making these transactions. So it's also like a cycle. You know, we talk about the Cowboys, and we talk about the Jaguars and Balky for the 2nd year in a row. It's amazing. The 2nd year in a row, they saw their talent that developed the year prior and said, we don't care. We're going to replace them. Incredible. Like, they just said, screw these contracts that are for cheap. We're going to try and find someone else. It's how bad teams stay bad, right? They just get stuck on the treadmill and they're running in place. Even though they think they're progressing, they're just replacing bad decisions with, the same decision.
Right.
And it keeps on going on and
it's
on.
A cycle. It's a cycle. It really is. I mean, there's a total soap opera reality show element to football that even if we're focused on the outcomes of the games, that's just a ripple of the personal dramas that are all playing out. Or the harmonies, or the love, or the positive, the light that is created when there is alignment, when there is a sense of a shared destiny and fate that everybody buys into. So that's often what we're seeing. And I think that what we're seeing the effects of, what we're seeing the ripples of when we watch the actual games. And it's going to be fascinating to see what they can do in Atlanta with the wake of this and the patterns. I think it was Blake Murphy that pointed out that, maybe Jameis can turn into Fitzpatrick, right? Maybe Mariota can turn into Tannehill.
So one hand, also we said, I guess I'm just going to spend this entire podcast quoting Bill Parcells, because another thing I always say is I got from him, and it's that he said, nothing ever changes because nothing ever changes. It's the truest sentence ever spoke about football and life. But also, in terms of Winston, it's interesting. First of all, we need him to come back healthy, but he's been injured long enough. He'll have enough recovery time that we think he's going to be just fine. The report Tuesday morning was also by training camp. He should be just fine. But also remember, and this was with Sean Payton, so perhaps it doesn't translate apples to apples, but they did basically make him the least fun player to watch in the NFL. They said, you cannot go out there and screw this up. And so, whereas in his last 2 games, that's what we remember, right? His last 2 games, they unleashed him. He averaged 32.5 attempts and 7 carries per game. That was the fantasy star we were starting before his injury. But before then, through the first month of the season, only 21.5 pass attempts per game, and he only threw 20-plus yards downfield 4 total times. An entire month, Jameis freaking Winston did not launch the ball basically at all.
Right.
And so it's going to be interesting to see, do they want to corral him again to start, or are they just going to say, we need as much help as we can get, go out there, kid?
Yeah. Well, and hopefully what they can do with Alvin Kamara and Marquez Callaway is on the ascent. Deontay Hardy, there's your aired out guy. Hopefully Michael Thomas is back. There's that. I mean, this could still be, even though this is Tampa Bay and the Three Dwarfs, it could still be some entertaining games. Mariota gets his game together. Winston gets his game together. We'll see what happens with Carolina. Speaking of bad organizations and personal drama and just that. Go ahead. You're shaking your head.
Just an absolute whiff. And now, as we do every year, right? Pro days, quarterbacks get steamed. The market books catch on because one quarterback at least stands out exquisitely at their pro day because pro days are rigged. They're rigged in favor of the players that attended that school. And so everyone then saw the news on Monday that Kenny Pickett's hand size when Tepper and like the Panthers organization measured it again at his pro day is apparently like 3 inches bigger than it was at the combine. Like now all of a sudden he has gargantuan hands and no one's worried about his performance anymore. And so it does sound like, and maybe it's just because it's recent, it was steamed, but it does sound like the Panthers, and we know they're in the quarterback market, but perhaps now they're in that quarterback market in the draft. And like you said, it was just a monumental, massive whiff on their part to have 2 full years to address the most important position of football. And knowing they're going to address it, everyone knew they were in the market for Aaron Rodgers, Deshaun Watson, and to still come up short on any viable answer is egregious. It's literally a catastrophic mistake.
Oh, yeah. Well, this is the theme, right? Here's the theme. Bad decisions beget bad decisions.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about Jacksonville tearing it down, constantly tearing it down. Like your number one rule of a hole, stop digging, right? And all of these bad decisions are just digging and staying entrenched in the mentality that got you into this corner in the first place. I mean, I think there's a lot of evidence that Shad Khan is just a malpractice owner. I mean, he's not fit to be an owner. Like he really should just step out of the whole process and let somebody else steer that organization, because it's again, Trent Baalke, Byron Leftwich dodges a bullet basically because he draws a line and says, I'm not coming if this guy is staying. And he was right to draw that line. When you see how things have gone, it's almost been a farce, John, watching Jacksonville rack up these signings. Brandon Scherf, okay, great player, but he's in the back 9 of his career. Evan Ingram, it was farcical, but it hurts when you think about the players that lay it on the line for these organizations, knowing that's going to happen. So bad decisions beget bad decisions. Go ahead.
That's what's funny about the number 1 overall pick too, is that books have Aiden Hutchinson now like anywhere from minus 450 to minus 350. Yeah. But the thing is, like, if this organization, if Baalke can do this in free agency, this chaotic, what makes you think they're going to make the logical decision of drafting Aiden Hutchinson? Of course, like Icom or Evan Neal could just come right up and be the number 1 pick. Of course they can. Cam Robinson's franchise tag doesn't matter. They don't care about that. So why should we care? But yeah, just to your point, the Christian Kirk, good for him. By the way, if I'm Terry McLaurin, I'm firing my agent immediately and I'm going to get Kirk's at minimum, since he hits free agency next year. But between that, and you also didn't say Zay Jones, of course, 3 years, $30 million.
God. Yeah, right. Again, good for him. You understand why he would do that.
Absolutely. And Evan Ingram is funny because that's the kind of player I want to bet on. I've always been Evan Ingram stan. elite athlete who blocks really well, who the last 2 years of his career got thrown off the beaten path because he was with terrible coaching, terrible development, and a terrible organization. I want to bet on the superb player who has shined in the past, but also Jacksonville's probably not the place that's going to happen. So unfortunate, but also good for him for getting a solid 9 million prove it deal.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you have to go where you have to go. Doug Peterson. I can imagine Doug Peterson selling me on wanting to come and play for him, play for his offense. I can imagine that. For 1 year to rehabilitate my stock. Who knows what other interest Evan Ingram even found out there.
Especially someone who, featured tight ends, even though it was prime Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert. Like, it's very easy to feature when you have those two players at that position. Same maybe is not going to be for Evan Ingram, but I'll definitely be dabbling in best ball this offseason. It's funny because we actually gained a lot of late round tight ends, and that's usually discussion, right? There are some talented guys who end up with opportunity, but this year it seems more so than ever because we have Mo Alley Cox with Matt Ryan, sans Jack Doyle because of retirement. That's interesting. We have elite athlete turned tight end from wide receiver Ricky Seals-Jones, who was pretty good when he was featured in Washington. He got 4 starts in without Logan Thomas and John Bates. And, 4 catches for 40 yards per game. Not bad, honestly, for a young tight end. And so just to get the entire depth chart to himself in New York under Brian Daigle, super interesting. And then not to mention Gerald Everett, essentially replacing Jared Cook. So, yeah, I mean, we have a bunch of late round tight ends, Ingram included, to feature this offseason.
Yeah, and Tunyon's going to be one of those picks you can say right in.
Absolutely.
Like if you take Travis Kelce in the first round, you still take Tunyon in the ADP, unless people push him into where he should be, which they won't. I mean, he should be drafted in the top 6 to 8 tight ends, but he won't be.
That's why Miami is also really interesting to parse through because we expect a changed offense altogether. Probably more of a yak creation machine as the 49ers are, which would actually bode significantly well for Tua. But also there are still far too many mouths to feed. I heard your last podcast, by the way, with the great JJ Zacharyson.
Yeah.
He put it perfectly in that he said, it's not really the narrative too many mouths to feed. It's that there are too many talented mouths to feed. And I think that's like Miami, Devontae Parker, Mike Gesicki, who was only tight end 14 in fantasy points per game last year, but still gets hyped up every single season. And then, of course, Jalen Waddle as what we assume will be their wide back usage. Cedric Wilson, who over the last half of last year proved to be a viable player with the Cowboys stepping into the slot. And so there really are a number of players to choose from, and who spikes from week to week is going to be nearly impossible to predict.
Yeah. Going to the late round tight end, putting a cap on that, by the way, crack shot. Let me get the number right. Crack shot 322. The chat room said Brevin Jordan. Yes, Brevin Jordan's another good one.
Yes.
You can take him in the last round. Brevin Jordan is another good one. Miami, I think it all hinges on your feeling about Mike McDaniel. And again, every time I bring up Mike McDaniel, John, I'm going to say he's one of us, or at least as close as there's ever going to be. He did play football at Yale, but he was so small. They were like, yeah, speaking of football players from Yale.
That's one of us, though. If we tried out for a football team, we would go for gunner on special teams and just try to make a career out of it.
Yeah, exactly. And if you believe in him growing this offense, if you think the dysfunction, the 3 offensive coordinators, et cetera, has been holding this offense back and the pieces are in place. The one thing that is disappointing about Miami, Chris Kaufman's fantastic, by the way. One of the best people on one team, just being your definitive voice in terms of the truth when they watch the team. Just watching him disappointed because Miami, they whiffed on Lyle Collins now. They're just not getting the offensive line. And as he's pointed out, and makes a lot of sense, look, Mike McDaniel's not going to have the offensive line he had in San Francisco. He's not going to have, he's not going to have Kyle Juszczyk. He's got Alec Ingold. So we'll see. But like you said, it may be difficult to predict week to week, but it should be a more efficient offense. It should be a much better offense than the one we've seen. How much better is yet to be seen. Okay, we've talked a lot about another theme here. I want to just mention, pull things together here. The market getting reset. You mentioned Christian Kirk, right? The market is reset now. Christian Kirk shouldn't be making per year close to what Mike Williams got, what Allen Robinson got, but that's how the market is. Go ahead.
We also know he got that because if you looked at everyone previously available, you could easily make the argument he was the best player.
Well, yeah, that's the thing.
And we think Allen Robinson and Odell Beckham are more talented, but given the circumstance, Odell Beckham fresh off an injury he has to recover from, Allen Robinson literally off the worst season of his entire career. So like everyone else sees the market and says, this is the best guy. We overpay for the best guy.
Yeah, and it's good because, well, good for players at least, because agents, I mean, really where this comes in terms of resetting the market is Davante Adams. Davante Adams pushed the ball way down the field for wide receivers.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, boy. Like every dude who signs a big contract for the next 3 or 4 years needs to give a cut to Davante Adams. And I guess to the Raiders.
He's the Tony Romo of wide receivers, where Troy and Joe Buck are thanking Tony Romo now because he upped the ante and said, this is what we should be making as announcers.
Yeah.
Davante Adams just told wide receivers, this is your market, go get it.
Yeah, this is what you're going to get. And Deshaun Watson. And this is part of teasing apart all of these things going on with this move, this seismic move in the NFL. But this also could be one, John, that we file under the earlier theme of bad decisions beget bad decisions, right? I don't know. We'll see. Go ahead.
It's just interesting on so many levels. And I've thought about this for so long because at one point, let's step back from everything that happened behind the scenes, allegedly happened right now anyways, and just say that the Browns were a brilliant organization and their recruiting, and that to just literally not only guarantee every single dollar to one of the best quarterbacks in the entire NFL, but then to also say, and I agree, this is slimy, but again, just from a business perspective,
right,
to say this suspension, which very clearly they are expecting, if not wanting, so they can quote unquote move forward. In their heads anyways, to then just say this suspension, this money you would miss out would then come from your 1 million base salary and not the 250 plus you're guaranteed from 2023 on. That was the icing on the cake, right? That was literally how they persuaded him to come to Cleveland rather than New Orleans or Atlanta. But at the same time, there is very clearly a mass exodus, especially with the organization sending out their empty, long-winded, just too many words statement on why they traded for Watson and their beliefs on moral ethics. And it was just very clearly a grasp trying to keep everyone cheering for the team. And so I'm just interested to see what happens. I want to hear the sounds every time Deshaun Watson touches the ball, even like the great Mark Sessler and NFL Network. The moment that trade happened, as a lifelong Cleveland and Browns fan from the area, he even tweeted out, "Goodbye, Browns." Like he's done. He's now done with the organization. And good for him, by the way, if that's your stance. Absolutely do what makes you feel best. And so I just am very interested to know what happens this season in particular, not even long-term, just this season, and what happens with the fans and overall the sentiment of the city.
Yeah. Well, this story, that's the thing about this, right? This is why
it's beyond football.
Well, yeah, it's so far beyond football. I mean, it's on a Shakespearean or Mount Olympus kind of level of the scope of this story and all of the different things that are implicated in it. Because it's not, by the time, it's kind of like O.J. Simpson in a way, John, in the sense that like how ESPN did that incredible series, I think it was called Made in America, how once you tug on any thread of this story, it leads to so many other things. And one of the things that stood out to me, and like, yes, we're going to talk about it, right? It's the off season. And I think that while obviously we talk about fantasy football, or we talk about, using this knowledge in these competitions, competitive things, but we also are at the soul of this, we're huddled around like the fire, the hearth that is football. And sometimes, like Lance Zierlein, you don't want to know how the sausage is made, right? You don't want to know how the sausage is made, but sometimes the curtain flaps open and you see the man behind the curtain. And in these moments, this was one of those moments, John. This was one of those moments for sure. Like you said, the statement Cleveland released, there were lots of people that said, like, this just makes me feel less excited to watch football. And there's not much deeper. Go ahead. I'll hand it off to you there.
No, I was going to say, I agree with that sentiment. Because when you're watching it, even if you don't realize it, you're not really thinking about football. Like when you're watching the Browns at least to open the year, no one cares about their win losses. It's enamoring, it's magnifying what else happens beyond that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when it's the story of the Browns, by the way, parody and reality merging when none other than Antonio Brown tweets out Cleveland Antonio Browns, like he is inviting himself to the party.
Of course.
And we'll see
exactly what they need.
Right. And it's interesting, and we'll see what happens with Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson has been a curse in so much that the Texans had to pay him $35 million last year. Is that about what it was? To do nothing. Just
nothing.
Because
and he was on, remember, he was on the active roster every single week. He was healthy scratched every single week.
Yeah.
After the first 3 weeks at NBC, we started just saying, actually, don't bring him up at all. Like literally, don't even add him to the inactives list. This doesn't need to be talked about.
It's obvious. It's resolved. Yeah, it's not going to change. But nobody that runs an NFL team wants to spend $35 million on nothing. This is bad. Deshaun Watson has been bad for the Texans. We'll see how he is for the Browns. Antonio Brown he did help the Bucs win a Super Bowl, but before that, he left wreckage in his wake in Pittsburgh, in Oakland, in New England, obviously. You might say signing New England Brown is kind of where it turned for the Patriots in the end, started unraveling from that moment. So we'll see. But there's just no way to talk about this story. And we can get into all the fantasy implications. David Njoku, there's another late round tight end, right?
Yeah.
But really, at least to pause and recognize that everyone else is experiencing this. Not everyone, but a lot of people are experiencing this on a level that is not just about football. And there's so much to tease apart about that. And it is also an example, John, again, how it just blows my mind that the NCAA tournament's going on. Major League Baseball is basically having free agency right now. NHL, NBA, chugging towards the playoff.
That was a wild week, by the way. Last week, the first week of free agency, because it was MLB overlapping with NFL, overlapping with the first week of college basketball, overlapping what in golf they consider the fifth major in the Players Championship. That went 5 total days because 2 days basically got rained down entirely. Fans, I know we're enjoying that, but you and I who like hang around the feed and then have to analyze all these situations, we're like, we have to fight through thousands of tweets just to get to like the one to start figuring out on our own. It was crazy. Crazy week.
Yeah, so much. And NHL trade deadline. The Penguins made a move. Since we talked about this, by the way, I just have to mention St. Peter's. I love St. Peter's. I love this. So you know what I'm talking about, John? Are you giving a brain cell to the NCAA basketball tournament?
No, I've never.
I understand.
I shouldn't say this on this podcast because I didn't want my mentions to burn. I don't like college basketball. So
that's okay.
I don't participate in the brackets, and I don't push that. It's like religion. I don't push anything onto anyone, right? This is what makes me happy is ignoring college basketball entirely. And if you think opposite, good for you. You should definitely just watch it.
Well, I won't bore you or bore the audience and try and get into the basketball.
Oh, it's not boring. I'm still interested in knowing what you're passionate about.
Well, March Madness was the first sporting event that I really fell in love with. At this time of year, I'm always reminded that I stayed home from school on Thursday and Friday. Every year, the first day of the tournament, my teachers knew, like it was just understood that I wasn't going to school on those days. I can remember staying up late, even as like a 6 or 7 year old, into the night watching games at like the Huntsman Center when they would show a West Coast game on a Thursday night at like 11:30 p.m. as a little kid. But Jim Valvano, NC State, was in Albuquerque, which is where I just moved from as a kid. The Pit, it's an underground arena. It's like the roof is like ground level. Something happened. I think it's one of the greatest upsets, arguably the greatest upset in sports history. It's up there with Miracle on Ice. And so that's the thing about the March Madness that I love is it's an arena in our sports world, John, where impossible things can still happen. Right.
And I agree with you very quickly. And that as a child, as a teenager, I loved it. I think what happened along the way, the only thing I can figure is that once it was the one and done, good for the kids, yes. Yeah. But also like then I didn't know anybody anymore. And so I just lost like my loyalty to everything.
I'm totally tuned out. Tuned out. Part of it also went to Syracuse, which is a basketball school.
Absolutely.
Basketball school. McNabb was there when I was there too, and it was a football school, a much better football school back then. My point is, in doing all this prelude, is it's happening again. And it doesn't as much have to do with basketball as just the stakes, right? St. Peter's goes out, Jersey City. I think they got a couple of thousand students, Jesuit school. And and they play Kentucky, one of the true blue bloods of college basketball, number 2 seed against a 15 seed. They just showed like the 2 gyms that the places that the teams play, or that Kentucky has 4 assistants that make more than the head coach of St. Peter's. 4 assistants. He makes like $250,000. They have an assistant that makes $900,000. The resources, John, the resources between these programs, it should be impossible for St. Peter's to win. It should be absolutely impossible, right? They go out, and by the way, the coach of St. Peter's, Stefan Holloway, is a North Jersey and basketball legend already. Played for Seton Hall, was a true great, just one of those people who comes up in a region and just brings greatness to their region in the sport of their choosing. And he's about to do it again. I think the Seton Hall coach has basically said, like, the job is his when he wants it now.
See, that makes it fun. What you just described to me is fun. And that's what I've heard. My friends have told me at this tournament too, is that every bracket is broken because it sounds like there are just a billion upsets right now. Like there have been seeds going haywire.
Right. There's some double-digit seeds. The team, they couldn't even bring a band or cheerleaders. They only brought the mascot, although they're playing. Their next round's in Philly, and it's only a 2-hour drive. So, but they beat, and then they beat Murray State. And it just is something, and now they're in the Sweet 16. It's like the moment. It's like their shining moment, their moment in the sun. They also have a dude who he looks like, I don't even know, Doug Edert, I think is his name. He's one of those players that I think his high school coach said, like, kids now are zoo tigers, but he's still a jungle tiger.
Interesting.
So
well,
he's
no matter what I think about the sport overall, I guarantee you, like, once the Final Four and the championship come around, I'll be locked in like everyone else.
Yeah, and I knew nothing about these teams until I just tuned in and to see like what interesting things were happening. Anyway, I don't even know why I totally go off on that tangent, except to say that impossible things can happen. It can tie it back around to the Deshaun Watson thing and say it's redeeming, or in some ways it's a cleansing, where there's true pure competition, where things happen, where even the sides that have all of these resources and all these things, like the Yankees, that's why it's like, now it's like the Dodgers, right? Like in baseball, it's just a ritual to root for the underdog, which also means, to root against the monolith, right? When there's no cap on spending and
I saw resources. The other day a tweet that the Orioles are at 30 million payroll, and the Dodgers, I believe, are 219 million.
Right.
Incredible.
Yeah, I'm a Pirate fan, so I don't even know why.
So you're used to the 30 million range. Yeah.
I don't even know why they exist, except to make money. That's why they exist. Well, that's the whole thing, right? That's where the Deshaun Watson thing was gross, or the moment of people feeling a bit of repulsion towards professional football, because it reminded people that it's just a business. It's just a business. And that's it. It's just a business for Deshaun Watson. It's just a business for the Browns. It's just a business for the Falcons and the Saints and other teams that ran on too. Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of just business, like, there's no guarantee, as good of a player on the field that Deshaun Watson is. You just look up and down the AFC, like, there's no guarantee the Browns even make the divisional round.
Right.
For the next decade, by the way, just as football fans, for the next decade in the AFC, we get some machination in the conference championship, most likely of Patrick Mahomes, Russell Wilson, Justin Herbert,
Josh
Watson, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow,
Lamar Jackson.
The list is absolute insanity. And so we're just watching the murderers row. And it's probably not everything, but it had to factor into Brady's decision, by the way, to see everyone leave for the AFC and just think, how about I just walk? How about I coast to the conference championship again, and then let's coin flip against the Rams or 49ers. I think those are the best teams right now. And then let's just see what happens. Yeah.
Oh, that Bucks thing, it's Leonard Fournette day. I think Jordan McNamara popped in to say that earlier. Leonard Fournette, what I said about Fournette earlier today, John, was he's not going to get drafted as high as he should be. He probably should be a first-round pick in fantasy leagues, honestly.
He should be a top 10 back. Yes. We saw last year 6.1 targets, 18.2 touches per game, and the 4 healthy games, including the playoffs, he finished and played.
Yeah. No.
And now no Ronald Jones, no Giovanni Bernard. It's just Keyshawn Vaughn. They're not going to use Keyshawn Vaughn in the third down role because that's what Fournette excelled at. Like, remember, there were times where it wasn't even Brady's game. Think back to that Colts game where,
Mm-hmm.
like, without Fournette busting open
Right.
Eberflus's zone scheme, the Bucs would not have beat the Colts at all. But instead, it was Fournette who, even like the very last play of the game, when they're trying to milk the clock, carried the Bucs literally in the end zone, just called it a day. 4 touchdowns.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Fournette has become. Last year, Fournette became his idealized self, and barely even noticed it. And also, the Bucs offense, like you said, it's very well chronicled that what the Mahomes offense did, taking what the defense gave them, evolving on the fly during a season, reacting to the resistance they're given to what they want to do, and redefining what they want to do. Tampa did that, and Leonard Fournette was the point of the spear. So
I also like to see it happen to him in particular, because for being easy to dunk on with Jacksonville for a variety of reasons, which we now know is just because of
exactly, it's not held against you.
Yeah,
whatever happens, what happens in Jacksonville stays in Jacksonville.
That's it. But as you know, for being of this New Orleans culture, right? Like Leonard Fournette, people don't realize, like, he was a prodigy. Like, he was supposed to be. He was
7th Ward, baby, right down the street, like 2 blocks from me.
He was touted as the next Adrian Peterson. He was featured on ESPN, like documentaries, features online, because like how successful he was supposed to be put back into the 7th Ward, like you said. Like that money, he was supposed to help out the community. That's how important he is to an entire culture. And like, people don't realize that's why it's always good to see him succeed, because we know, like he even said before, like, I'm trying to help out. Like, literally, I'm carrying a city on my shoulders.
Yeah. Yeah. New Orleans is a great football city, by the way. New Orleans is a terrific football city. A couple of quick New Orleans football stories. Okay.
Interesting.
Number one, they're both having to do with Mardi Gras because it's New Orleans. Number one of the things, if you want to see the cultural resonance of football, come to a Mardi Gras parade in New Orleans. Come early, because the NOPD shuts down the parade route, and the road is just like a park, basically. Like the street, like St. Charles Avenue becomes like a park. And all the kids go out, and most of the parades, not all, throw foam footballs. So every kid has, like, a bag of foam footballs that comes out to Mardi Gras. And they go out in the street, John, and they throw the football around. And you see, like, pick up 4-on-4 games with kids, girls and boys, all ages. You see just like a dad and a kid throwing a football back and forth. Everywhere you see people throwing a football back and forth. That's story number one. Great. Number two, nobody, I think, understands, and I didn't live here at the time, how important it was to the city to win the Super Bowl. It was everything. It was really everything. And I was talking to some people at the block we set up, because generally you want to have your block, your place, and go back every year. And he said that year they called it Lombardi Gras. I think basically it's a city that is celebrating just being alive basically every day. But when you add a Super Bowl, it turns it up to 11. And they said that Sean Payton, who was down with Mardi Gras this year, by the way, I think it was around like Camp Napoleon, he said, see you on the neutral ground at his last press conference. He said, see you on the neutral ground. And he's a man of his word. He took the Lombardi trip. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, he's settled in New Orleans, right? He seems like someone who's never going to leave. Yeah.
Or at least he'll always come back. That's how New Orleans is. Right. People leave, but they always
Florida
come back.
Fish and then always come back. Yes.
Come back. And but they said in Lombardi Gras, he came down off the float with the Lombardi trophy, and he walked around the crowd, John, and people were reaching out and touching the trophy.
That's amazing.
And he just did a lap around the float. Everybody was like, I mean, that's how much more clear of an expression you have of a shared accomplishment of a community and a team, and just everything. And that's New Orleans. That's football. I want to ask you.
Everyone thinks about it as like a tourist city to an extent, and it somewhat is because of Bourbon Street. But like, you could read about it too. But really, you need to go. Like, you need to go, and you need to just feel it. Like,
yes, and you're coming, right? I mean, you said you're coming.
I am coming. Yes, I don't know exactly when. Like, Rich Rebar was also texting me the other day saying, "When are you coming to Cleveland?" It's like, there's a lot of things in the works right now.
So I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you about that on that note. This show is eventually going to turn into a New Orleans show. I'm just going to basically be like promoting New Orleans, because
I will literally be on the couch next time.
That's great. Yeah. It's a great show. Actually, there's a dude, Mark Bologna, who does a pretty good show. I think it's called Beyond Bourbon Street. Has great guests, great information. And anyway, I want to ask you, because you've been more itinerant lately in your life. Sing the praises of a place you've been in your travels.
Oddly enough, the past couple of months, I really haven't traveled anywhere since I've been getting settled permanently in Chicago. The new
Okay.
background behind me now, this is going to be my office. It's still being built, but this is literally the background we're going to have moving forward for the foreseeable future. But I would still say, and maybe I said this in the last podcast, but the place that stands out the most to me, you don't even need to really stop, but I think everyone should drive through Utah at least once in their life, like drive border to border. And
yeah.
I'm not even a rest stop person. Like I'm the person who takes the window in the airplane because I'm never going to use the bathroom. I'll control my bladder. Utah, I think I literally made every rest stop. I made it a point to stop and just admire for a few minutes and then move on to the next one. And you realize that every rest stop and every natural viewpoint is actually different. Like none of them are the same. And now we're talking about an entire state drive through. So not even go stay somewhere. I'm telling you, if you just make a driving trip, it's like 5 hours across the state. If that, do it in Utah for sure.
American Southwest. I was, again, I referenced this earlier in the show. I lived in New Mexico from when I was like 3 to when I was 7, and it had a very deep, profound effect on me. I mean, I became super fascinated with Native American culture because we lived really close to the Como Pueblo, which I think is the longest continuously inhabited Pueblo. I don't know if it's that or Taos. And the American Southwest is just mystifying. It's a great example of the epochs of time too, because you're seeing environments that were entirely different. It's like in West Texas, they know the Permian Basin was the bottom of an ocean. It really forces your mind to stretch and think about like how much the earth has changed. Even in New Orleans, I think I mentioned this recently on the show, there are places that they said like Abraham Lincoln landed here, but it's actually like out in the river now. Like the Mississippi River changes its course that much just over like a period of time. We can imagine that something that was land is not land anymore, and something that wasn't land is land now. That's the nature of this whole area. It's all been created by the Mississippi River. But anyway, there's the forces that created the American Southwest, the natural vistas. When I would go, like there are places, Zion Canyon, Bryce Canyon, Arches, the Grand Canyon, obviously, but it's everything in between too. Like you said, when you're just driving at a rest stop and you look at the Vermilion Cliffs, and it's so vivid, the scale and the colors and the dryness of the air and the plant life, and it's entirely different than anything you've experienced. And you know that it's special because when you go to these places, a lot of people are not speaking English around you. Like people from all over the world know that the American Southwest is truly one of a kind.
Yep.
And there's some Mesa Verde, like the Anasazi, the cliff dwellings.
And if you're doing long road trips, especially like Midwest to West Coast, which I've done several times, New Mexico, Arizona is where it picks up. That's where it gets interesting. Like West Texas, maybe just because I grew up with it. So like the hill country, the flatlands, it's cute at first, but then you realize it's 6 hours of seeing the horizon, empty horizon. Yeah, it's just a straight line and you don't know where the horizon ends. Also, by the way, I don't know if people know this, it is longer from Dallas to, or like, let's just say one end of Texas to the other than it is from that end of Texas to LA. Right. I've made this drive. So like, 12 hours to get across the state, slightly less than that to get to LA. And so like, you see a lot more variety than when you're like driving across the South. A lot of people don't have that opportunity. I would suggest you should, because you should see these things, but there are only so many windmills you can take before you're like, I'm done with this.
No, this is really the show. I wish we had another whole hour to talk about this, because that drive on I-10, I've done that drive on I-10 pretty much all the way from like Junction to, I think in Arizona you get off, because I've gone to San Diego. Almost the ruts in the road, you can let the car will just drive without you even putting your hands on the wheel. And at night, it's like the darkest, inkiest black. Like if you get on a stretch and there's no other car around you, it can really kind of hypnotize you, because you don't see anything.
Bingo. I was going to use the term highway hypnosis. It's a cliche, but no, it's a real thing. I've had it happen to me where you get locked in and you're seeing tunnel vision and you literally have to stop. Otherwise, you're just, it's crazy. Yeah. It takes.
I would scream out the mile marker as I was driving by myself at night. I would scream out the mile marker, like jolt myself back into reality when I would see, and it just emerges out of the black, like a number. And Texas, real quick, because Texas history is so interesting. They make kids learn it like in 7th grade or something.
They really do, yeah. They won't teach you taxes or how to mortgage a house, but they will absolutely teach you the Alamo for sure.
And when Texas was won, it was independent, and they tried to ride out to the border, which is like the Rio Grande, all the way through what is now New Mexico. They couldn't. I mean, you can't survive out there, you know. But American Southwest, it's incredible, and it's always incredible to get to spend time with John Daigle. Now at 4 for 4.
It is for football now. We didn't even get to that. I know there's no time. I know Cecil likes to keep this tight knit under an hour.
Yep.
But yeah, so much more to talk about next time I stop by.
Anytime.
And more importantly, thank you for bringing me on. Always good to talk with you. And like I said, next time it will literally be on your couch.
Yeah, we have to record a show on a road trip. Like we should be like recording in the car, like going through these vistas that you talk about. Everyone needs to take the Great American Road Trip. Don't lose that in this day and age.
Mm-hmm.
It's important. And
I think it's more important than ever, actually.
Exactly. It becomes more important the rarer it is. But it's not rare to spend time with wonderful people like John Daigle in this wonderful community for wonderful people like you. Always, folks.